What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Revit video. My hope is that with this video we'll be covering a somewhat complete guide of how to print out of Revit. That's something you're going to have to do quite a lot. You're going to have to print, and I'm going to use this floor plan as an example. I've got a number of sheets that are just blank or have this floor plan on it to show you as an example of how you might print a full-size sheet. I'm using just a basic 30 by 42 sheet. But let's now get into the print. If I go to File and Print, this is where we find everything juicy about printing. No kidding. First of all, you want to choose your printer. For the sake of this video, I'm really only going to mess with an Adobe PDF. You may have the Bluebeam PDF, you may have some specific kind of PDF printer. You may have a physical printer that you need to print these sizes to, but most of what I cover in this video is going to apply, and typically when I'm printing from Revit to a digital PDF and specifically single files, I like to use Adobe just because of the ease of how it all works and how you can almost set it and forget it. So I'm going to choose Adobe. I'll go to Properties. Most of this we don't need to worry about, but I will cover it in just a second. Layout is landscape, never change that. I don't need to change it. If for some reason you're printing something vertical, great. Color, doesn't matter. Paper source, just leave it as is, automatically select. To the PDF settings, default settings, standard. You probably don't want to mess with all of this. I'm also trying to keep this not so complex, because printing, it can look complex and appear to be complex in Revit, but it doesn't need to be. So there are a number of things I won't cover just because either I've never used them or it's just not necessary to mess with them. So default settings here, standard, leave it as standard, don't mess with that. Security, if you need to add security, do that. I typically don't need to. Adobe PDF output folder. So this is the first place we need to determine where we're printing to. And we're going to get back to that later, but I'm going to cover what all these things are. Page size. There's an infinite number of different page sizes. We've got view PDF results. This is going to say, hey, I'm going to show you the PDF after I print it. And then add document information. I don't generally mess with that. Rely on system fonts only. Yes, that's fine. Delete log files on successful jobs. Yes, we don't need to keep those if it was successful. That's great. So that's everything with the printer itself. So as we come down here, I think the default is current window, which is everything in the view. If you were to zoom extents, that's going to be everything. And so if you click current window, Revit will print everything that you see. So we come into file here, we've got combine multiple selected view sheets into a single file. If you want to make one big combined set, or you just have one page to print, this is how you might do it. So at this point we need to determine a location, and I'm just going to put it on the desktop, and I'm going to call this print example. Print range, again, current window is everything in the entire view. Visible portion of current view is very nice because maybe you want to zoom in on something specific, print it out for a real quick markup that you need to make physically, and you don't need a full-size sheet printed. So you can choose visible portion of current view and just get like a nice snapshot that's printed for you on a smaller piece of paper. Selected views and sheets, very underutilized, but also very nice, very helpful. If I go into select, I actually have the option of choosing specific things that I want to print. So in this case, I've made all these sheets, and there's nothing fancy to them. There's really nothing even on them, but they're sheets that I want to print for the sake of this video. So I've got 5 sheets, and I'm going to select all of those. And if I hit OK, then it's going to ask me, do I want to save this? I don't really want to save this. But if I go back in here, I can still see that they're checked. But one real great reason why you might want to use views and sets or sheets is to create a set out of this. So up here it says view sheet set. Right now it's just in session, which means I just choose it and move on. This is nice because once you get lots of views and sheets, you can filter between what you see. So in this case, if I only want to see sheets, I can only check sheets, and I can see that these are only sheets that I have in the view in this project. And maybe I want to print all of them. In this case I do. But maybe I want to print views. Well, I can select different views here. But regardless, you have the option of saving this set, because maybe you want to come back in 2 weeks and print the same thing. Maybe you are issuing a different set later on, you want to print the same thing after you've made changes. You don't want to have to continue to select which pages you want to print, or even print them individually. Gosh. You can save this set. So I'll hit save as, and I'll just call this test. And I'll hit OK, and now I can see that test is selected there. And I'll hit OK. And I'll go ahead and let's do one with all the views. So I can uncheck all of these. I will only check views, and I will select all these and check that, and I'll save this as views. I'll hit OK. And something I like to do before I even mess with any of this, and before I try and make a set, you definitely want to check none, because maybe at some point you had some checked or saved or whatever. If you don't realize they're checked and you don't hit check none, they'll also end up in a new set that you make. Therefore, you're printing things you don't want to print. It can get kind of confusing. So right now, if I hit check none, nothing is checked. If I check one sheet and one view, I can uncheck views, and then I hit check none on the sheets, the view will still be checked. So that's something to be aware of as well. If you have sheets unchecked and you check none, it's not going to uncheck the sheets. It's kind of weird. So make sure you're showing both before you hit check none or check all or anything, and then go on into making your set. So at this point, let's go back to test, and as soon as I hit test, all of those are checked. I can hit OK, and it's great. Options here. I don't think I've ever messed with this. I've never needed to print in reverse order. If you, for some reason, need to do that, great. I don't necessarily need to. Settings, this is kind of the bread and butter, the beefy part of printing. So up here, we've got, it's almost like a template. I've got no template. I'm using Revit out of the box template, so there's nothing here but default, and that's okay. We're gonna work with those. Paper size. You might start to notice that there's a number of places where you need to determine the paper size. And yes, unfortunately there is. And I do that mainly for confidence sake. Like in the Adobe PDF, you're gonna have to actually determine the type of paper size that you want, and just to feel better about yourself, and this is the reason I do it. In the print setup here in Revit, you wanna pick the same size, you're kind of good to go. The source, I've never messed with. This is basically saying, where is this going to be printed? Well, you're dealing that with printer, choosing a printer, but I just let the default tray, like you're just printing to a tray. You know your printer, you're gonna deal with the printer yourself. You don't want Revit to try to figure out where to print the printer, like which tray or anything like that. The paper placement, so by choosing the paper size, you're determining the size, obviously, but the paper placement is saying, where do I want to put everything that I'm printing on the piece of paper? I like to choose center most of the time if I can, because center is centered. You're going to kind of know you get everything that you want. Offset, you could say there's no margin, or you can determine a margin or anything. If I'm using this offset, it's because someone built a template and it kind of works with a specific title block, and it's just kind of a default. But in any case, I tried to use center just because I know what's going to happen. The zoom, this is very important, very, very important, because one of the main reasons why you want to print in Revit is to really show off the scale. So scale is very important in Revit, obviously, but you could mess up a print and your scale would say one thing and have the print itself be a different scale. Well, we don't want that. So to know that your print is always to scale, if you hit zoom, the default is 100%. So you're done, you're good to go. Zoom at 100% is going to give you your model printed to the scale that it is at. That's all you need to know about zoom. You can always change this if you need to, like make it half size or double the size. There's better ways to do that by changing the paper size, but anyways, that's zoom. And if you want things to scale and want them to stay at the scale they are in your Revit model, keep this at 100% and use the zoom. But fit to page, this is obviously much easier to use. So like we said, you're going to determine the paper size, and after you determine the paper size, if you choose zoom, it's going to give you your content to scale. Although, let's say you choose a giant paper size, some like Arch D where it's 30 by 42, and you have like the smallest little model known to man, if you choose fit to page on that giant sheet, it's going to give you that small, very small model. It's going to blow it up to basically fit the size of the page. So you're going to cover the entire extent of that giant page with a really small model. It's just going to blow everything up. Obviously it won't be to scale, so whenever you use fit to page, you're likely not going to get your model and prints to scale. Orientation. This is very important. We looked over this in the Adobe PDF printer. I always like to use landscape because I'm always printing landscape, just the way it is. If you're printing portrait for some reason, do that. Hidden lines, I don't usually mess with this, but remove hidden lines using vector processing, yes. You always want to print with vector, and vector being, as I zoom in, I'm not going to lose quality. As I zoom out, I'm not going to lose quality. You're not losing quality, period. Whereas if you notice you see pixels on images or sheets that you might zoom in a PDF, you can definitely tell that that was used as a raster. It was printed with raster processing, meaning that you're not having a vector that's, pixelless. You're getting these pixels that as you zoom in, you can start to see individual pixels. So for printing things to scale, with zoom 100%, vector processing, which should be default. The only reason you would do raster processing is if you have a high resolution image or something you want to show off that has shadows, and unfortunately this is something to be aware of as well. The second you change any view to have shade or shadows, you're going to automatically have that view as rastered. It's going to be rastered regardless of what you choose in the print, because it's just the way it works. Like Revit is going to print that as a raster, whereas all these nice black and just basic colored lines is essentially what's happening. Those can show up as vectors, no problem. In the appearance, raster quality high, you can just change the quality. I've never needed to change this. It's just going to take a lot longer, and you're going to need a heck of a video card if you start getting into presentation and have really large, high quality renders on your sheets. If you want to do that, great, you can. Colors, I like to have color, I like to keep color if I can, so I kind of keep that at default. Most of these options I'm going to keep at default, and I'm going to recommend that you do too. View links in blue, and this for color prints only. If for some reason you want to print out and you want the print to show that you have a link versus not a link, that's why you might use that. This is thankfully checked by default, but hide reference work planes. So like all those green dashes, like reference lines, reference planes, scope boxes, they're not going to print because these are checked. There's hide scope boxes, there's hide crop boundaries. You can print all of those if you want, but I don't know why you'd want to. Thankfully, those are default to not print. Hide unreferenced view tags. This is great too. I typically like to hide unreferenced view tags, and what it means by this is if you've created a call out and you've got a new view and it's calling out, and you'll just see dashes. And you'll see dashes because that view is not on another sheet. It's not able to be correctly referenced from one sheet to the other, so it's considered to be unreferenced. I don't want to see those, so I'm going to hide unreferenced view tags. I don't want to see those. Replace halftones with thin lines. You might have changed visibility graphics in a whole lot of your views to say, you want to get a different gray tone from something that you're not trying to portray in one view to the other, and so you might halftone that, which is going to put it at like 50% gray. So what you can do here is replace those halftones with thin lines, and maybe for some reason the print quality you're getting with these weird and thick and thin gray lines that you've halftoned doesn't look great, but it would look pretty good if you just printed those instead as just basic black thin lines. That's great, you could do that. I've never done that. Region, edges, mask, coincident lines. I never used that, never really needed to do that. So that's going to cover the print setup, and I know that was a giant mouthful to try to get across like what you might have to do to like print one sheet in Revit, and that can be overwhelming. So what you can do also is save this as a template. If you remember at the top, this is just a default template. You can save all of this information, all these settings as a template, and you can cycle through those very quickly. I highly recommend doing that if you don't already have some sort of template set up I'd probably do it for different page sizes or paper sizes. different kinds of views that you might need to print, but I don't need to mess with any of this as far as making it a template right now. But regardless, if you change anything from a template and you hit OK, you're going to be prompted with a, hey, do you want to save this for future reference? I always hit no. I'm not going to make a template every time I change something. It's just not going to happen. So let's get into actually printing these 5 sheets. What we can do is, of course, we have the option of combining these sheets, or we can actually have them printed as separate files. Now, whenever I issue sheets, I'm going to issue them as individual files. I'll also have a combined set with it, but I'll combine it later in Acrobat or Bluebeam. Do that later. So what I'm going to do is take this test, which is going to take these 5 sheets, and it's going to print all 5 of them, and we'll do a combined set first. But what I want to do is make sure that I have the paper size right. So I will go to Setup and make sure that I choose size ArcD, and I'm going to pull a graphic over just for a second so we can see the different paper sizes. These are all the paper sizes that you're probably using to print. The ARC paper sizes, A, B, C, D, and E. Typically, you're most familiar with using C 24 by 36 or a D 30 by 42. I sure hope you do not have to use E, because it's giant. It won't fit on a desk at all. Honestly, D just barely fit on a desk. So that's going to be just the basic paper sizes. So I'm going to use a D. I'm going to use landscape. I'm going to zoom 100% because I know what the scale's at. It's at 1/8 of an inch. I want to keep it that way. And just for the sake of this, I'm going to hit center. This really wouldn't matter, because if I use printer limit, the printer limit is going to be the paper size and whatever. But for peace of mind, I'm just going to put that as center. Landscape, obviously, and everything else I'm happy with. So I'm going to hit OK. It's going to ask me, do you want to keep these settings? No, I don't. It's not a big deal. I always like to preview this, so I can go to current window and hit preview to preview just this one window before I print all 5. So when I hit preview, I'm going to see, okay, well, I have something wrong. In this case, it looks like a paper size. So let's go ahead and change this to E, because it appears as though the Revit default template is E. I'll choose no. I'll hit preview again, and there we go. That works. Now, Revit's default template says that it's 30 by 42 or 30 by 42. It's an E, and I have chosen the E. I can't say why this doesn't appear to be the full extent of the paper itself, but this is a perfect example as to why I might say make your own title block, one, but also make your own print settings to make sure that you're really filling the sheet, because you don't want to print sheets like this. But for the sake of this video and for what it is, I'm going to continue with it like this so we can see the process. So as soon as I hit OK here, I'm now going to choose again the name and the placement. It's really just to confirm. I'll hit save, and so once I do that, it's going to create a PDF. And once it does that, it will open, and we can see that we have all 5 of the PDFs, one after another. Here in just a second. There it is. PDF is printed. And here we go. There are prints. We've just got that one page. Perfect. So now what we can do is, maybe I want to print all 5 of those pages and combine them. Again, this is really not going to do just about anything different, except now I'm going to have all 5 sheets. So you can see it's sending page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. PDF was created. Let's open that up. We've got page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. Perfect. Very easy to use. But now, maybe we want those to be separate files. Now I'll hit create separate files, and we can go from there. We still are using that set, which is choosing all 5. But now when I hit OK, now it says, are you sure you want to print 5 views? And they're going to be separate views. And this is really important, because I can't tell you how many times I just like blindly hit yes and not realize what I was doing, whether I was meant to print multiple sheets at once or not. But once you get a lot of sheets, like I've hit yes on 150 sheets, not realize what I had done, and had to just shut down Revit where I was because it was going to print 150 sheets, separate files, everything all at once. So I'm glad it does this, even though it can be a bit annoying, but it's telling you I'm going to print 5 sheets, or the number of sheets you've selected. Are you okay with that? Yes, that's fine. So in this case, it's going to take the print example, which was the name of the file I wanted to create, and it's going to take the sheet information. That's nice. That's really nice. So I'll hit OK. And it's going to print the first page, and then again, it's going to come up with the second page. That's great. And then finally the third page. And now this can be absolutely just the most annoying thing in the world. One, like I said, if you do accidentally print more than 5 sheets, let's say like 150 sheets again, it's happened to me before where I've printed 150 sheets and I've had to go through like that and click this. Well, the reality is don't do that. And I didn't actually do that. You don't have to do that. I just simply shut down Revit in the hardest way possible through the task manager, because that was a clear mistake and I wasn't going to sit there and wait through that. But I went through that process to show you a way in which you wouldn't have to do that. So like I said, it's going to take, if we come into browse here, we can see all those different sheets, and I'm going to delete them just so we don't have to mess with them. Delete all those sheets. But the thing to be aware of is that the file name is going to be the prefix. And unfortunately, you can't leave that blank. I can't just hit save on nothing. So I do have to call it something. So I'll call it prints, or typically I'll use a project number, or something specific to those prints. Maybe it's architecture, like arc or something. I don't know. It could really be anything. But so there's that. But the thing that's going to really save you time, my gosh, it will, is in the Adobe PDF properties. First thing, view Adobe PDF results. That's just like I mentioned before, it's going to open the view after it's printed. So imagine printing 150 different sheets. Every time you get one sheet printed, it's going to open. Well, that's so annoying. That's ridiculous. So I'll uncheck that, and that's going to immediately save you a lot of time. And you'll notice that the page here that we set in Revit is going to be populated there, which is awesome. Something else I like to do is this output folder. So just like before it printed every sheet, it popped up and said, hey, what do you want to name the file? Do you want to change the name of this file? Well, this is where you can resolve that issue. Adobe PDF output folder. So let's browse again to the desktop, and I'll hit OK. That's all I got to do. So I'll hit OK. So I've told Adobe as well as Revit where I'm printing it, and I've given a little prefix here in Revit, and I told Adobe, don't show me the results after every print. And as soon as I do that, I'll hit OK, and again, I'm going to say, hey, you're going to be printing 5 sheets. That's fine. Okay. And now I'm not going to be prompted with what I want to call it. As you can see, the different names popping up. I'm not going to be prompted with what I want to call it or where I want to save it every single time something's printed. But now what I can do is I can go to Adobe, and I can go to Open, and I can see that all of these files on my desktop are now here. I didn't have to do anything as far as acknowledging every single file. That would have been just crazy if this were a set of 150 sheets. It would just be stupid to do that. So I can open all these, and they're individual sheets. All 5 of them are here, just like we want. So I really cannot highly recommend that way of printing large sets all at once. Now, of course, you can always go back and print combined sets, or even combine them in Acrobat, but really that's going to be the basics. Now, one last thing I will show is, let's say I wanted to look at just these sets of bathrooms. So I'm obviously zoomed in on the file, and so I'll hit print, and what I want to do in this case is probably just, if I'm going to print this out, just the restrooms out to mark up on, maybe I want to print this out on a basic printer, 8.5 by 11, a physical printer. Well, obviously change your printer type, and then change your size. I would change it just to a basic letter. Again, I'd probably keep this at landscape centered, but I'd probably fit this to page. And why would I print this to a page? Well, I hit OK, and I would print this, I'd fit it to the page because I want to see the visible portion of the view, not the whole view. So if I use the current window and I hit preview, I'm going to get the entire sheet really compressed onto an 8.5 by 11 sheet. Now I don't want that, but I do want the visible portion. So it's going to take everything that's visible on my screen right here and fit that to an 8.5 by 11. So let's hit preview. So now I can see that everything on my screen is within the 8.5 by 11. And so this is what I'd use to really quickly print a small sheet of paper that I use to mark up on. And I would tend to go between this and my full-size prints and printing full sets. I don't really use a whole lot in between unless you're printing specific views to specific printers, and obviously that can change, but I wouldn't go too far out into the different types of prints you have because it can get confusing and I wouldn't want to confuse anyone else. So those are a few different ways I might print. How printing works in Revit, it can be kind of confusing, overwhelming at times. Even I'm overwhelmed at sometimes, just how much you need to manage before you can hit print. But really utilize these sets. They're so important. You can rename them, obviously make new ones as you need to, but those are very important, along with the specific Adobe print properties to save time printing individual sheets. That will save you so much time, headaches, and everything else. So I really hope you learned something from this printing guide. This kind of all-inclusive printing guide in Revit. I sure hope it's kind of all-inclusive, but if you did learn something, please demolish that like button. That really helps. Also subscribe. I love seeing the number higher, obviously, but that just means I'm helping that much more people, and that's what I'm really here to do, to help you guys out. So if you enjoyed this video, please like it. Also subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.